What are the strongest civilizations in Age of Empires 2? I don't know about random match, but in Deathmatch, one of the strongest is the Franks. In my last Deathmatch civilization overview, you guys voted this civilization to be the one that I would overview, and that is what I'm going to do in this video. So I'm going to look at their bonuses and their tech tree to show you why they are so powerful. Make sure to stick around to the end, because I have an interview with Nilly AoE, who is a top Deathmatch player, and I'm going to talk with him about Deathmatch strategy for this civilization. Now the first Frank bonus is that castles cost minus 25%. This means they cost 488 stone instead of 650. Now in a deathmatch game you start with 5,000 stone, so I want to know how many more castles are you going to be able to field with your starting resources. Now for a normal civilization, you can afford either 7 castles and 4 town centers with 50 stone left over, or you can afford 6 castles and 11 town centers, which is probably more along the lines of what I would choose, with 0 stone left over. However, with the Franks, with their starting stone and the cheaper cost of castles, you can afford either 9 castles and 6 town centers with 8 stone left over, or 8 castles and 10 town centers with 96 stone left over. This is a pretty significant bonus, because it means that building these castles is going to be way easier in a deathmatch game. Moving on, the next Frank bonus is that Cavalry have plus 20% HP. Now, in Age of Conquerors, this bonus only affects Paladins and Cavaliers and Knights. It does not affect Scouts or Heavy Cavalry Archers. The next thing to note is that the Franks do not have bloodlines, meaning that this plus 20% HP bonus will affect units before the bloodlines upgrade and not after it. However, as far as the Paladins goes, this means that they have 12 more HP at 192. Now, that does sound like not that great of a difference, because after all, it is only 12 more HP. However, it does change some things. So first, in a 1 vs 1 fight between one Spanish fully upgraded Paladin and a Frank Paladin, the Frank one survives with 10 HP left, which is not a big deal. However, in a 20 vs 20 fight, 9 Frank Paladins survive. Now, even though these Paladins don't have that much HP left over, they can still go and do damage, which means that this small effect really does snowball. However, we need to see how this actually affects Paladins versus the units that actually would be used to counter them. Generic Halberdiers that are fully upgraded deal 37 damage per hit to Paladins. This means it'll take 5 hits to kill a Spanish Paladin, but 6 hits to kill a Frank Paladin. Now, in a 1 vs 2 fight with 2 Halberdiers, both of the Paladins die, and Franks do get an extra hit off, but that's not that significant. However, in a situation with 20 Spanish Paladins versus 30 generic fully upgraded Halberdiers, 3 Halberdiers survive the fight. But if you switch the Paladins to be Frank, 11 Frank Paladins survive the fight. The reason for this is because they are all surviving 1 more hit, meaning they're all dealing more damage to the Halberdiers, which means, in the end, that you have more Paladins surviving, which could go on to deal damage to your opponents by raiding their economy. In other words, even though this bonus doesn't seem that great, it is actually very strong if you look into the specifics. However, versus a generic fully upgraded Heavy Camel, which deals 24 damage to a Paladin, it takes 8 shots to kill both civilizations' Paladins, so there is no improvement versus Heavy Camels as far as I can see. Now, in the HD expansions, this bonus also affects Light Cavalry, and so I want to see how good the Frankish Light Cavalry line is. Now, the first thing to note is that the Franks do not get the Hussar upgrade, which is a painful loss, partly because the Hussar has better stats, but mostly because it looks friggin' amazing. So to compare, a generic fully upgraded Hussar has 95 HP, which is 35 more HP than the Frank Light Cavalry in AOC, because remember, the Franks don't have bloodlines, and it's 23 more HP than the Frank Light Cavalry in the HD expansions. All the other statistics are the same, with the exception that the Hussar also attacks a little bit faster than the Light Cav. This basically means that in Age of Conquerors, their light cavalry are pretty bad, and in the HD expansions, they're okay, but they're not as good as another civilization's Hussar. Moving on, the next bonus is that farm upgrades are free, and in the HD expansions, Foragers work 25% faster. Now, this bonus really is not applicable in Deathmatch because you don't have to research farm upgrades and because you won't be picking berries, so we will not look at this bonus. Moving on, their unique unit is the Elite Throwing Axemen. It's an interesting unit because it is an infantry unit that deals melee damage, but it has a ranged attack similar to hand cannoneers or to archers. It's similar to the champion in that it counters trash units and halberdiers, importantly, and it's similar in that it's infantry. However, it has less attack and it is ranged. It's also similar to the hand cannoneer in that it provides range support and in that it counters infantry pretty well. However, the hand cannoneer does have more range, more attack, but it has less HP and less armor. I think that for the Franks, the Elite Throwing Axemen should be used in most situations because it has better stats than the other two units, and it is very good when massed. It's countered by Scorpions, Onagers, Arbalests, Paladins, and it's also countered by high melee armor unique units. However, it's not countered by Rams, Skirmishers, or high pierce armor units. If you want to see the specifics of this unit, I'd suggest that you watch my Elite Throwing Axemen overview for a more in-depth explanation of this unit. But regardless, it is still a very strong unit for the Franks in a deathmatch game. The Frankish unique technology, Bearded Axe, gives the Elite Throwing Axemen +1 range. And their other unique technology that was added in the HD expansions, which is Chivalry, makes stables work 40% faster. Now, this technology is very strong, because in the time that another civilization can create 5 Paladins, which is about 1 minute and 53 seconds, the Franks can create 7 of these Paladins, meaning their rush in a deathmatch game is going to be much stronger, because they're going to be able to spam and to mass their Paladins way quicker than other civilizations. The Frank team bonus is that Knights have +2 line of sight. It is nice, and every now and then it'll keep you from taking an engagement that you would take otherwise, but it's not that helpful in most situations. And so, with all their bonuses considered, let's move on to the Frank tech tree in a deathmatch game. They have below average archers because they critically miss 2 blacksmith upgrades, but they do have the hand cannoneers, which keeps them from being bottom tier. Their infantry is above average because it is fully upgraded, and because they have the Elite Throwing Axemen. Their cavalry is highly above average because of the really good paladin buffs. However, they lack versatility, which is why I don't think they're quite the best in the game. However, they are extremely close. Their siege is average, but capable, because even though they do have a lack of siege rams and siege onagers, they still have siege engineers and heavy scorpions with bombard cannons. I'd say that their defenses are above average, because even though they do lack bracer, bombard towers, and camels, they do have cheaper castles, and they have all of the building HP bonuses. I'd say that their navy is far below average, because they lack elite cannon galleon, bracer, 2-man saw, heated shot, and shipwright. The only civilization that could be thought of as worse than the Franks, as far as the navy is concerned, would be the Aztecs because they miss galleon. For the Frank economy, they miss 2-man saw, but wood is probably the least important resource for the Franks, so it's not that big of a deal. Monks also miss redemption and atonement, meaning they can't convert buildings, monks, and siege weapons, but versus elephants, their monks perform very well. So a quick recap of the Frank tech tree is that even though they do have 2 bad grades, they are in the 2 least important categories in Deathmatch. And so, with the tech tree and bonuses out of the way, we can finally talk about Deathmatch strategy. Now, bear in mind that the Franks are probably one of the most popular civilizations among pro Deathmatch players because of their various bonuses and unit choices. This means that in any overview I do, I need to be as careful as I can to really demonstrate the power and the correct usage of this civilization. And so I thought that the best way for me to attain this accuracy would be to interview a top Deathmatch player for the Deathmatch strategy section of this overview. I interviewed Nilly AoE. You may know of him because he has been a very integral part of the Age of Empires 2 community. He has hosted tournaments and casted games, and has been in the Age of Empires 2 community for a long time. However, what you may not know about him is that he is the highest ranked Deathmatch team game player on the Voobly ladder, and he has a very high ranking on Deathmatch 1 vs 1 as well. So let's jump right into the interview. So, when you see Franks in a competitive or tournament deathmatch game, what are the most effective opening plays that you'll see, Nilly?
Okay, so then it kind of depends how open the map is and how many stables you want to go. But for example, like building 8 stables start, following it up by 6 barracks, and then followed up with some castles is a pretty aggressive start. A lot of buildings, you will pump out a lot of units and surely won't lose map control too early.
Alright, are there times where you think that you could deviate from this, say maybe in a different map where it's harder for you to build your units, or if your opponent is doing a very good rush?
For example, if the map is like very tight, you're in a bottleneck, then you can go for castles a bit earlier, I would say. And then you can fight in clumped up areas, maybe even add some onagers, have your Paladins and Axemen in a more central area, but especially if like your gold spots are very open or at the front, you need to start with a lot of stables for sure.
Alright, so thanks a bunch. And on to the next question. What would you say that the most strong generic Frank army is in Deathmatch?
Well, if you had endless amount of resources, it's basically Paladins only. But yeah, we'll never get into that scenario. So the big problem is, how do you manage your food in a Frank war? And you run out of food quite early because all of your 3 units you're basically building costs a bunch of food. So you kind of have to have a mix. At the start, you still go for mass Paladin, probably like 60 to 80 at the start, I would say. And then 1 to 2 groups of Halberdiers, and then add Axemen. The thing is, if you hold the first rush and you're kind of transitioning into like minute 8 to minute 15, I would say, you don't really want to have Halberdiers at that point anymore. You basically only want to have Paladins and Axemen when you start your golden cup.
That's very interesting. Is that because Paladins are just efficient versus maybe other Paladins as Halberdiers are once you're in a population efficient situation?
Well, at the start, it just comes to pure mass. And if you go into the game where both people are maxed out, which is kind of the standard scenario in Deathmatch after minute 6, 7, I would say, then you need to think a lot about pop efficiency. So if like I'm going mass Paladins, let's say 100 Paladins, and you go for 120 Halberdiers. Cost efficiency wise, you are winning, but you will lose all your army and I still have something left, and I will keep pushing and pushing, and you might get, overrun there. I could snowball maybe if I add some other units, and then you could still lose the game, although you were more cost efficient.
Okay, that does make sense. Do you think that in a game with a higher population limit that are very common on HD, with maybe 300 pop, do you think that would be different at all? Or do you think that would still be the same advice you'd give someone?
Well, I played some on HD as well with pop 300, and it feels like just having the max 300 is so much more valuable than to have a strong pop 200 army. So I feel you could even go for more buildings, spam more, get even more army out, and I feel in pop 300 games you need to go for significantly more halberdiers than in a pop 200 game.
Alright, thanks a bunch. Now moving on to a more specific situation where maybe your opponent is playing a very heavy archer civilization, and they're trying to use those to counter your elite throwing axemen, and maybe even some of your other infantry. And of course they'll make halberdiers to counter your paladins. What units would you make to counter this type of army?
Well, as a Frank player, you're not really scared of a guy who's going for a lot of archers. Your paladins are the strongest in the game, and you feel super safe. Most of the time, if your enemy has only halberdiers and archers, he's very immobile. So try to snipe his traps, make it your paladins, and just raid his eco. He will have no chance of really retreating. Every time he moves 40 halberdiers back, you can attack the front. Every time he's not moving them back, you can just raid endlessly and just play the long game with the better eco.
Alright, how about when you're against a very infantry-heavy civilization? Is it the same situation because they're immobile? Or will heavy infantry overpower the Frankish cavalry?
Well, obviously, infantry, if you just think about like a Goth mix army with Huskarls and Halberdiers, the Huskarls will slightly lose against the Paladins, Halberdiers will perform reasonably well, but your Axemen basically are a very good addition and will deal with most infantry really well.
That kind of leads on to the next question that I had, and that is it ever a situation where you should add in scorpions or hand cannoneers to back up, or is just the generic composition with Franks and elite throwing axemen already strong enough?
It really depends on what your enemy is going as a composition. If you're playing Goth and he's going mass champions, or you're playing a Viking player and he's going mass berserks champions, it doesn't really hurt to add in some scorpions or some hand cannoneers. I feel like scorpions most of the time are a bit of a better unit in Deathmatch, because you need to patrol in so much more in Deathmatch. On a random map, I would say hand cannoneers could be a bit more viable because you have less units to work with.
Okay, yeah, that does make a whole lot of sense. Now moving on to the next type of army that you'll oftentimes see used to counter the Frankish army. If your opponent is a really good cavalry civilization that also has camels, what do you think the Franks should do to deal with this type of army composition?
Well, that's probably the time where you cannot really go for a lot of paladins. If your enemy is going for a lot of camels, for example, like the Saracens, feel like the perfect counter against paladin-based army there of the Franks. Well, that's just how the Age of Empires works. Some civilizations are pretty good, and Camel civilizations are kind of the counter to the Franks, so you kind of need to switch into Halberdier Axemen as a composition and just hope that your enemy isn't very efficient when it comes to gold.
In deathmatch games, civilizations with strong siege combos oftentimes perform very well. I'm thinking of civilizations like the Mongols and the Celts, and in the HD expansions, the Ethiopians. So what would your advice be to deal with this sort of thing, especially if it's versus a siege and halberdier combo?
I personally really like siege and halberdier. It's pretty tough to counter if you don't have any siege, or if you don't have a unique unit that's really good against it. And that's probably one of the other good composition against the Franks. So again, the problem with siege and halberdier, very immobile. Just raid his back, raid especially his wood eco, because all his units are needing wood. Raid his gold if you want to, and maybe some defensive castles holding him back. If he pushes with rams, we are pretty fine with Axemen behind our castles, but if he goes for traps, SO and rams, SO, halberdier and traps, he's still pretty slow. Just raid him.
Alright, is there ever a situation where you would advise someone to go with bombard cannons against siege, or do you think that's too expensive and that's too much of a risk, would you say?
I personally play more bombard cannons than most DMers, but the big problem in Deathmatch is you have only so many limited clicks in a given time. So if you want to raid with paladins, keep your eco running, and micro bombard cannons, there's very little time to really have a good food eco, to collect relics, to maybe go for some other sneak attacks. So if you have like one frontal attack, have some castles, some axemen to protect your bombard cannons, I feel they're a great addition. Maybe you can snipe some SO, maybe some traps even. But if it's a crazy all-around game, it's just not really viable.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because they are a whole lot to deal with. And finally, this is the last question. How would you say that the HD expansions have improved the civilization? Because after all, you have Chivalry, and the Elite Throwing Axemen has had their stats buffed.
Well, the 40% faster stables is just incredible.
Oh yeah.
Like, there is a new Deathmatch tournament coming up, and I feel like there's so many different compositions. Just feel like Frank's Hans composition has to be incredibly strong.
Oh yeah.
Franks together with Slavs, for example, you don't need to build houses, and your stables are instantly producing, basically. It's just getting crazy. So I feel this could be even too much, and, well, the designers obviously have the main focus on random map. Like 95% of all our games are random maps, so
yeah, unfortunately.
Well, some say yeah, for us DMers,
yep.
Maybe unfortunately, yeah. So I think they got a solid improvement there with the last expansions.
Alright, thank you very much for this interview, Nelly. This has been a lot of fun, and it's very helpful and very useful for me. Thank you very much, that's very kind of you, and I'll see you later.
You're welcome, see ya.
Alright, thanks. Bye. Well, there you have it, guys, from the mouth of one of the best deathmatch players in Age of Empires 2. I'm sorry about how long the video turned out to be, but I think that the interview with Nilly was definitely worth it. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to be seeing you in the next video. Bye.